Hi, my name is Kendra, and in this presentation, I'm going to talk about the trait perspective on personality. So the trait perception, this mostly uses personal assessments to determine your personality type. And today I'm going to talk about Young, Cattell, the Big Five model, and the Penn model. So Young looked at extroversion and introversion, and he believed that people can exhibit like tendencies for both of the extroversion and introversion, but they'll always have one that's more dominant over the other. And then he also introduced the Myers-Briggs type indicator, and that is also known as the MBTI test. And that analyzes, the first letter is either E or I, and that means extrovert or introvert. And then the next letter is sensation or intuition, and that means realism versus imagination. And then it also looks at thinking versus feeling, which is if you look at things logically and objectively versus personal and subjectively. And then the last letter is J or P for judgment or perception, and that looks at if you're structured or more flexible. And my personality was ENFJ, which means that I'm more extroverted than introverted, I'm more intuitive than observant, and I rely on my feelings more than thinking, and I'm more judgmental than perceptive. And on the 16 Personalities website, I found that ENFJs, their strengths, they're typically tolerant, reliable, charismatic, altruistic, and natural leaders. I think that applies to me very well, all those strengths, because like whenever it comes to work and school, I'm very reliable because I'm on time, I'm responsible, and I need to get done what they ask me to. And I'm altruistic because I care about people and their well-being. I think the other ones apply to me as well. And for weaknesses, the ENFJs are typically overly idealistic, too selfless, too sensitive. They can fluctuate with their self-esteem, and they have trouble making tough decisions. I think this is also right because I'm also overly idealistic sometimes. Like I always hope for the best, and you don't always get what you hope for, and it kind of leads to disappointment sometimes. But I also struggle to make easy decisions, so tough decisions are really hard for me to do. For workplace habits for the ENFJ, I also found this on the 16 Personalities website, and as a subordinate, they always want to like please their bosses, and they'll go above and beyond to meet their expectations, and that's really good in most cases, but sometimes they can be taken advantage of and get too much work piled on them. As a colleague, they're really easygoing, and they like to keep peace in the work environment, and they really avoid conflicts with their other coworkers. And then as a manager, they're really good at leading by example, and they're really good leaders overall. And that's really encouraging for me to know that as my personality type, because I'm going for HR management, so I could potentially have a manager position one day, and knowing that I may be a good fit for it is nice. So Cattell, he came up with a 16 personality factor test, and this just determined what he had 16 different traits, and it listed what you were highest and lowest at. I found that my highest was perfectionism, and this is rated on a scale of 0 to 4, so the higher you score, it depends on which level it is, but like for perfectionism, I scored a 3.0, so that means that I really lean towards that. Like I really want to do my best at everything, and I don't like to settle for anything. My next three highest were warmth, reasoning, and emotional stability at 2.8. And then my very lowest two were privateness and vigilance. And if you score low in privateness, then that means that you're very open and you're like not private at all. Whereas vigilance is the same way. So if you score low in vigilance, you're very trusting in people instead of being more like restricted about who you let in. And also I scored low in tension, and that's true as well because I really avoid conflicts. So this here, it just shows what I scored highest in and what I scored lowest in. So the Big Five model, this looks at 5 different aspects, and the acronym for it is OCEAN. It stands for openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. Neuroticism is also referred to as emotional stability. They're kind of opposites, so it just depends on what test you take, it measures. Openness, if you have this trait, you're imaginative, you're creative, you're open to new ideas. Conscientiousness, if you have this, you're typically reliable, on time, organized, detail-oriented. Extroversion, sociable, likes to hang out with people, likes to meet new people. Agreeableness, they care a lot about others, they're cooperative and friendly. And then for neuroticism, if you score high in this, then you're typically like nervous, you worry a lot, high-strung, could be depressed kind of thing. So I found that I scored high in all the categories except for like emotional stability. I was about halfway because while I don't think I'm depressed by any means, whenever I get worked up about something, I can be very high-strung. So I think that's a good measurement of that. As I've determined from other personality tests, I'm extroverted over introverted, and my highest was actually conscientiousness, which I think is also right because it kind of relates to the perfectionism thing about always wanting to do things right and like being on time. Like I'm very conscientious at work and school, and I'm very organized with it all. I also scored high on agreeableness, which, as I mentioned with the tension, I don't like conflict, so I think that's true about agreeableness. And then Hans Eysenck came up with the PIN model, and this was kind of like an alternative to the Big Five model. And he determined that there was 3 different things, and that's where the PIN acronym comes from. But it's either psychoticism versus normality, extroversion versus introversion, and neuroticism versus emotional stability. So it still had some of the traits of the Big Five, but he kind of altered it a little bit. The people who show like psychoticism, they're normally aggressive, manipulative, egocentric, and assertive, whereas normality would be the opposite. Extroversion, mentioned it before, sociable, expressive, likes to meet new people, that kind of thing. And then neuroticism and emotional stability, I kind of mentioned that before too. They're kind of anxious, low self-esteem, they can be depressed sometimes. And so after analyzing it, kind of from the Big Five to this, I think that I'm score more towards normality than psychoticism, more extroverted than introverted, and I think I'm kind of on the border between like neuroticism and emotional stability because, as I mentioned, I don't feel depressed and I'm not anxious all the time, but when I do get worked up, I get like high-strung about things. So I think that's an accurate understanding of it. So in conclusion, when analyzing my own personality, I found that I'm an ENFJ for the Myers-Briggs test. For Cattell's 16 personality factors, I scored highest in perfectionism and lowest in privateness and vigilance. So that shows that I'm a really outgoing, like not private person, like I'm really outspoken and I like to meet new people and stuff. And perfectionism shows that I really care about what I do and I'm detail oriented. The Big Five model, I scored high in all, scored highest in conscientiousness, which kind of lines up with perfectionism, and I scored lowest in the emotional stability. And then the PIN model, like I mentioned, I think I lean more towards normality and extroversion over psychoticism and introversion. And then I think that neuroticism and emotional stability I'm kind of even on. And here are my references. And that's it. So in conclusion, today I told you about Young, Cattell, the Big Five model, and the PIN model. Thank you.